Creatures of the night, it's your girl Tati. Let's talk about season 5, episode 1 of Dark Side of the Ring, the Ballad of John Earthquake Tenta. I'm so happy my show is back. I dare y'all to watch this episode and not feel emotional. This episode was so great. A great way to start off the season. We have Chris Jericho back narrating the show, so I'm pretty sure we're going to get him for the whole season. We also had John's family, his wife and children on this episode. We also had Haku, Jake the Snake Roberts, Earl Hebner, Jerry Saggs, Fred Ottman, which is also known as Typhoon. They were on here talking about John, and man, for a lot of these episodes, you hear horrible things sometimes about people. You're not going to hear not one bad thing about John. This guy was absolutely loved and respected, and that's what makes this episode so emotional, because you could just hear it in everyone's voice and every experience that they talk about how much they loved him. Now, they do start off the show showing his debut in WWF, which was in 1989. He was planted in the crowd when Jimmy Hart is looking for a big-ass dude to come take care of Ultimate Warrior in the ring, and he ends up coming out. Like, there's just no way you could not have spotted this guy sitting in the crowd. He was absolutely huge. Now, John did start off as a kid being a fan of wrestling. He would watch wrestling with his dad. He wanted to be a wrestler, but the family just could not afford for him to have, training and also going to the gym. So he would do whatever he could so that he can get into shape so that he can be able to wrestle. He did find a wrestling program where he was getting training. However, that program was dropped and he could no longer have any training for wrestling. Now, while he's in college, though, he decides that he wants to quit, goes to Japan, and goes there to become a sumo wrestler. And he's actually won 3 tournaments back to back, and he was undefeated for 8 months as a sumo wrestler before he realized this shit ain't for me. It was too demanding on his body, and I guess you can say he didn't have the discipline to continue to be a sumo wrestler. So now he shifts gear to his first love, which is pro wrestling, and he starts wrestling in Japan. Now, while he's over there, he obviously got the attention of Vince McMahon and WWF, and they ended up offering him a contract. And, he's loved and respected in Japan. And he really didn't want to leave because he didn't want to have, leave on some type of bad terms because he's leaving their company onto WWF. But the great Kabuki was like, go over there and do your thing. And he went over to the WWF. Now, before he goes over there, though, he does meet his wife Josephine. She's from the Philippines, but she moved to Japan to be a singer, so she would perform, and that was her job. Now, she's 4'11", and he is 6'7", and everyone was saying how she was the alpha of the relationship, despite him being obviously so much bigger than her. She was the alpha in the relationship. Now, he decided that he wants to marry her and also be a father to her son and move them to Canada so that when he is wrestling for WWF, they'll be in the States and he'll be able to travel throughout the States and go back to Canada. Now, this was a big thing for them because obviously the schedule was much more rigorous when it comes to WWF, so this was somewhat of an issue and hard for them to adjust, especially as they started having children, and this became really difficult for them to push forward while he's out almost the whole year. In the WWF, John was Earthquake. Now, he was huge and tall, and he was a perfect heel to go against Hulk Hogan, feuding with him and feuding with Jake the Snake Roberts. Now, he did go back to Japan. There was an event on April 1st, 1991, actually called Wrestle Dream, but I'm guessing for legal purposes, for the episode The Dark Side of the Ring, they called it Wrestle Fest. He had a match with Koji Katao, and they've had matches before, and Katao, he feels some type of way. He was a sumo wrestler turned pro wrestler, hadn't been wrestling that long by the time that he started wrestling with Earthquake. And before you go out there and wrestle, you already know what the results is going to be. You go out there and you work with whoever you're working with, and then whoever it is that's booked to win will win. Obviously, he was not happy about that and ended up having a shoot match with Earthquake. Now, Earthquake is trying to be professional. He's trying to do the best he can to get through this, but Katao is making this so difficult. Now, he's over here having a hissy fit out the ring, in the ring, and even ends up kicking the referee and getting disqualified from the match. Not only that, his ass gets out of the ring, throws a big ass table towards the ring, gets on the mic, talks shit about John, and then he goes and say wrestling is fake, and then the crowd boos the fuck out of him. Not only was the crowd not feeling that type of behavior, but he was also fired later on that night, and I guess rightfully so, for not being professional. And with a moment like that, John ended up getting a lot of respect from not just from the fans, but from other fellow wrestlers because of how professional he, took that situation. He could have beat the fuck out of him. He could have just went crazy because of what happened, but instead he remained professional, and he, gained a lot of respect and love from the wrestlers because a lot of other wrestlers would not have handled it that way. So we had Jake the Snake Roberts, who talked about the infamous moment where Earthquake gives an earthquake splash onto Damien. Now, at first, Vince McMahon stated that they should just have Earthquake, do his finisher onto Damien when Jake isn't looking. But then Jake came up with the idea that, Earthquake should somehow obviously get him tied up onto the ropes, where he actually is forced to watch him give an earthquake splash onto Damien in the middle of the ring. Now, this moment is actually on YouTube, so you can go back and look at this. This is actually hilarious to me. Jake does share that obviously Damien was not in the bag. He would have been dead. And that it was just pantyhose filled with hamburger meat, and everything's good with Damien, obviously, at that point. Now, after that, though, after, having some big feuds with some pretty big wrestlers in WWF at the time, it kind of felt like there was, not much for him to do. He ended up forming a tag team with Fred Ottman, who was at the time Tugboat, but this time they became the Natural Disasters, and it was Typhoon and Earthquake, and I guess that works. Now, they were managed by Jimmy Hart, who was not managed by Jimmy Hart at some point of their careers, and they even won the WWF Tag Championships. Now, this obviously is a huge accomplishment. However, for his family, this was bittersweet because that meant that he was not going to be home even more at this point, since he was holding a title, and this was a huge deal for the family because the kids were so young. And his daughter states that she was so young, and he was kind of like a stranger because he was barely there, and she felt like she didn't even really know him because he was hardly at home. And this is something that a lot of children of wrestlers, they have that same experience where they don't see their family, their fathers or mothers often because they're gone most days of the year on the road. And I get it. He wanted to have some titles, but obviously there was a price to pay with that when it came to his family. Now, Fred, who was also Typhoon, he talks about how when he and John were on the road together, they wasn't drinking, they wasn't doing drugs, they wasn't getting into parties or anything. Fred was, a true family man. And the only thing that they would actually do was fucking eat. They would go to restaurants or just take food back to the hotel, and they would just eat, because those two guys obviously was really, really big at those point of their careers. So they kind of bonded with the whole food thing and obviously kept their weight to what it was. And I found that to be really, really interesting. Now, obviously, the titles are lost, and, they continue to have their careers, and John is feeling like, there's not really much for him to do. And then he ends up pretty much disappearing from the WWF and going to Japan before he heads over to WCW. So before we talk about John's time in WCW, we gotta have to talk about what kind of led him to go over there. Now, obviously, his partner, Typhoon, also known as Fred, he is in a WWF. Now, while he is there, unfortunately, something happens to a family member. Now, he had a business with his brother-in-law, and obviously he's on the road and he can't physically be there, so his brother-in-law is running things while he is away. Now, while that's happening, while he's on the phone, the brother-in-law's on the phone, there is some men who come inside of their business and they're getting into a fight with someone else. Now, the brother-in-law goes over to break up the fight, and unfortunately, he is shot and he dies instantly. And because of that, Fred has to leave the business, obviously WWF, to go take care of his family and take care of, the business as well. So he leaves from there. And then when things obviously, I guess, get better for him and his family, he goes to WCW. Now, this is one of the most hilarious moments of pro wrestling history ever. Now, for him to debut, he's not really sure what's going to happen, but they're telling him that, he's going to be part of the War Games and he's going to be part of Sting's team, and that they need for him to be this mystery partner for the War Games. Now, he is on the set of A Flair for the Gold, and he is backstage, and he is told that he got to wear this silly ass costume with a glitterified helmet, and that he was going to have to break through a wall so that he can be revealed as his mystery partner. Now, when he is on set, he sees the wall and he's like, oh, this wall is the real wall. Like, this is not some flimsy ass shit that I'm supposed to go through. He knew that for him to go through it, he was going to have to put a lot of force. Now, this is at Clash of the Champions, and this is a live segment in front of a live audience. Now, here he has his cue where Sting is announcing that they have their mystery partner and all that stuff, and then he's supposed to come out when he says, because he's none other than the Shockmaster. And then obviously when he hears that, he's supposed to break through the wall, and the pyro goes off and all that shit. Instead, what happens? You guys already know the story though. When he goes through it, he has to put a lot of force. So he's being interviewed for the show, and he's like, it was so hard for him to get through. So he knew how to put a lot of force. And with him putting so much force to break through that wall, that's when he obviously ends up falling. When he goes through it, the helmet actually falls off, and you can see his face. Maybe some people might not have realized who that was instantly, but you can still see his face, and he pretty much picks up the helmet pretty quickly and he puts it back on. Now, one thing that I did mention that I didn't know was after that happens, the Shockmaster is speaking. It's not actually his voice speaking. It's actually Ole Anderson, rest in peace, who passed away a few days ago, actually. He's the voice of the Shockmaster. I actually did not know that, so that was pretty surprising for me to hear that. But obviously nothing went with that character. The whole shit flopped because of that very moment, but it's given us one of the most hilarious moments of pro wrestling. However, Vice producers, they played that clip for everyone that they were interviewing for the show. Everybody's laughing, shits and giggles or whatever, but Haku is just fucking... He lost his mind laughing at that clip. Like, he could barely speak because he's laughing so much, and he has this infectious laugh that you cannot just sit there and not laugh when you hear Haku laughing. He's absolutely hilarious. Like, he could not stop laughing. And you know what? I get it. It's a hilarious moment. And, it wasn't something that was intentional. Like, he literally was just trying to get through the wall. Way too difficult for him to push through. And you know what? That happened. And then, you know what? At the end of the day, though, you got an action figure out of that. So that's cool. So unfortunately, that doesn't do much for Fred's career. However, John is interested in going to WCW. He gets a nice big fat contract from them. He moves his family to Florida. And while he doesn't really get much out of WCW in terms of having a really great career in their promotion, he does have a better family life. With his family, he's able to go out with his family, be able to participate with their sports events, and he's able to be a dad, which is something that he was not able to do when he was part of the WWF. and they became much more closer. However, when he goes to WCW, instead of being the Earthquake, because legally they could not call him Earthquake, he is the Avalanche. Then after that, he is the Shark. And then he's just like, fuck it, like what the hell is this? Like after a year being the Shark, he just wants to be himself and just have a meaningful career in WCW. So then he comes back as John Tenta. And unfortunately, that does nothing for his career either. And he ends up leaving WCW. Then he goes back to the WWF in 1988. And you're thinking, okay, this is a smart move. Yeah, he went, tested other waters. Things will be better when he goes to WWF. Wrong. They put him in a mask, so no one actually knows it's him, unless, I don't know, you got a really good eye and you can tell that it's him. They put him in a mask, throw him into the oddities, and now he goes by Golga. And he's the one that's walking around with the Hartman teddy bear and everything. It's just absolutely insane. And honestly, when I look back at that, he really didn't deserve that. After things didn't work out in the WWF, he went to open his own wrestling school, and that lasted for about a year. Then he went on to work retail at a mall, and this was very different. However, John was able to provide for his family in however way he could. And then he discovered trucking, and he became a truck driver driving long distance. Now, it was during this time where he realized that he was sick. However, he would not go to the doctor or tell his family or friends what he was experiencing. Now, he did experience having blood in his urine, but he kept that a secret for a really long time. Then he finally summoned the courage to tell his wife about the blood that he has in his urine. They went to go see a doctor, and he got tested, and he was diagnosed with bladder cancer. Now, the cancer, the tumor itself, was about the size of a baseball in his bladder. And at that point, they said that there was nothing they can do, but he could do chemotherapy to see if that would work. But the chances seem to be pretty low for him. Now, after that, they do end up telling the children about what's going on, and he goes on to have his treatment. However, the chemotherapy does not respond. The cancer does not respond to the chemotherapy that he's receiving, and unfortunately, his health deteriorated. Now, he was able to experience his son's wedding back in 2005, and he was just hoping that he can make it at least to see his son get married. But then he ultimately ended up passing away on June 7, 2006. Fortunately, although it was bittersweet, the entire family was there when he passed away, and they were all able to say their goodbyes before he passed. Really great episode. I really did enjoy everyone just saying nothing but sweet things about John. One of the things that I thought was interesting was the wife seemed to be really angry about when they held his funeral. The WWE did not send anyone from the company to, on behalf of the company, to pay their respects to John. And she seemed to still be upset about that because he spent, a huge portion of his career being in the WWF and obviously being one of the more popular wrestlers there as well. People love and respected John. He had a lot of fans there, and no one came from the company to show respects. Now, I did verify that on SmackDown and on Raw, they did have the little graphic that said rest in peace to John Earthquake Tenta. And I get it, they did show something, but he worked really, really hard for that company for years and no one showed up. I think I would probably feel some type of way too. One of the things I really enjoyed about this episode that made it more emotional for me was that his wife spoke about him like she is in love with him just the same way as when he was alive. Like it's almost as if he was still there and she was still experiencing that love that she received from him. And I just felt so deep to feel. Like you can really feel that strong emotion of how much she really still loves him. And that was just made things so much more emotional. I enjoyed this episode. Next week we will have an episode about the Bagwell, so that's going to be interesting. That's when the drama's going to come in. Not too much drama with this episode, but I did enjoy this. This was a little bit more lighthearted compared to a lot of the other darker episodes that we've seen. But really, really great episode. And, you know, if you haven't seen it, go ahead and check it out. So far, it is on Vice. I'm not sure where else you can check out these episodes, but I will be back next week with another review of Dark Side of the Ring. And then you guys can catch me throughout the week doing AEW stuff. See you then.